Thanks for staying with us. There are calls for government to adopt a more transformative reforms as far as the SRD grant is concerned. This includes moving towards a universal basic income grant that guarantees income security for all speedily. And it comes at a time when the Social Development Department published some proposals and that we're looking at some of the changes of the SRD grant. And of course, public comments have been closed now. There are some views about these particular proposals. Let's now speak to Siyanda Baduza, who's a researcher at the Institute of Economic Justice. Siyanda, good evening to you and thank you so much for your time. So there is a view by the Universal Basic Income Grant Coalition that while it welcomes the opportunity for public comment on the proposed regulations, the time was rather limited. You share the sentiments?
Yeah, we definitely do share the same feeling. So just for context, this year, the draft regulations for comment were published on the 25th of March, which was only 1 week before the expiration of the regulations. Whereas in previous years, we had seen the regulations published as early as like mid-February. What that has meant is that there's been a very short window for consideration and comment. So there's only around 3 weeks provided in order for us to do that. So there's definitely been a closing of the public participation process this time around when it comes to these draft regulations.
And given that then, how confident are you that there could be a meaningful input and discussion when it comes to what needs to happen then going forward? Siyanda, are you able to hear us?
So we're definitely hopeful that they can be. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, go ahead.
So we're definitely hopeful that there can be a meaningful engagement this year when it comes to these regulations. But we have submitted comments in the past. We submitted in 2023, we submitted in 2024, and even individual members within the coalition have submitted. And what we've seen in the past is even though we've raised issues related to these regulations, there haven't been any changes. And I mean, even beyond the public participation process when it comes to draft regulations, we've been very vocal in our advocacy for this social relief of distress grant. So for example, consider the court case that was towards the end of last year and that judgment that was provided earlier this year, where the High Court essentially agreed with us on essentially every aspect that we brought forth to the court, that those were unlawful and unconstitutional. Those haven't been meaningfully reflected in these regulations at all. So a lot of the problematic things that we've pointed to remain in these regulations, with the only changes really being extremely minor and not really bringing any substantive change. So whether it's going to lead to any meaningful change, we don't have any precedent to believe that to be the case this time around.
And there's a proposal that people should not be rejected based on the answers that they give to questions on the application form. Does this help at all to address some of the concerns that would have been raised about the criteria in order to be able to qualify?
So this is something I think that we do welcome, because this regulation, which essentially meant that there was the application process, which collected information on, say, someone's payment details as well as contact information. But there were also questions that went beyond that, which asked questions that were not necessary for determining whether someone actually qualified for the grant. So, for example, one of these questions was, in the absence of a grant in a particular month, how do you survive? Which essentially like pushes people to admit that they do have alternative means, even if they don't, because there isn't an option to say you starve, for example. And we know that in the early phases of the grant, that this was, or these questions could have been a basis for exclusion. So SASSA would provide statistics on how many people self-excluded. But we know that they haven't used this criteria in a while, or at least haven't released any data that says that they've used this for a while now. So while we do welcome the removal of this questionnaire as a basis for determining eligibility in the regulations, whether it will lead to any meaningful change is likely not going to be the case, because we know that they haven't been, or at least as they say, they haven't been using this criteria for a while now.
So is it clear when you're looking at the developments now, is it clear as to what new applicants, have to do, or will they be able to be processed in time come May, or is there uncertainty on that part as well?
There's massive uncertainty because with the late publication, essentially, with the draft regulations coming right at the expiration of the existing grant, the only thing that the department had, essentially, the only option they had in order to not cease payments entirely was to, as they've made provision in the grants, to rely on historical data in order to make these decisions. Essentially, what that means is, so the way the SRD grant works is, in principle, it's supposed to react to people's immediate circumstances. So if someone doesn't have the means in March, then they would be approved for that particular month, and so on and so forth. It works on a month-to-month basis. Mm-hmm. But with the pausing of the regulations, the proposal now has been to make decisions based on historical data for April and May. Essentially, decisions for whether someone is approved or declined aren't going to depend on someone's actual means in that specific month, which of course defeats the purpose of the SRD grant in and of itself, which is to provide that immediate relief. But also, it means that it's not clear whether any new applications are going to be processed, because the way it works is people's applications are carried on a month-to-month basis. So if someone has already applied or had an application, say in April 2022, that has been assessed every single month. But people who are newly applying now, it seems as though those people aren't going to even have the chance for their applications to be processed as far as these regulations stand.
Sure. It definitely calls for some clarification then from the department or even SASSA itself. Thank you so much, Siyanda, for your time this evening. And we'll try then to get some answers to some of the questions that are being raised, especially around some of these issues of uncertainty. That was Siyanda Baduza, researcher at the Institute of Economic Justice.